How can the art of drag increase climate change awareness?
This is the Earth Day Party Podcast with Shannon Burns and Sarah Christie. Get in, bestie. We're going to clean up the planet.
Welcome back to another episode of the Earth Day Party. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are diving into conversations with experts about the planet, sustainability, and what we can do to make a difference. And today is all about science is a drag, which I didn't know was something that even existed. So can you explain exactly what this is?
This is Joy Overload. Science is a Drag is the world's first and longest running fully science-themed drag show. So the team elevates science communication through the powerful art of drag. Science is a Drag is by and for 2S LGBTQIA+ communities, empowering scientists and communicators to bring queer and intersectional science communication.
I love this. This is like worlds colliding. I love that they were able to take something that is so joyful and also make it educational. That's so sick.
Right. And I mean, we've talked about RuPaul on and off air. We're both fans of Drag Race. Are you watching any seasons right now?
I'm not currently. Are you?
Of course. We also talked about how if you're like, you can just pick a country and then you probably have 5 seasons that you could be watching.
Unlimited.
So I'm powering through the UK right now. I'm on season 2 of the UK. But funny because in season 1 of RuPaul's Drag Race in the UK was Crystal Will See You Now. And right after we did this interview, I opened Instagram. This was pure coincidence. Crystal Will See You Now shared a video where she was in drag talking about climate action. So it was just so serendipitous of this conversation. And again, someone using their art to join another bigger conversation. What are some of your favorite parts of those shows?
I love the creativity. I think seeing how creative people can be on the show when it comes to expressing themselves and their different outfits, and really just seeing everything that they do after the show, because all of these queens just go on and have these incredible careers doing so many different things, whether it's getting into music or more into fashion, or like Kine, who is someone from Canada's Drag Race who teaches math dressed in drag on TikTok. So there's just endless possibilities. What about you?
Oh, for sure that, but also going to a live show and just like unbridled joy. You look around and everyone has a smile on their face. There's so much fun. And that's kind of what Science is a Drag embodies, is just making this safe, joyful place to learn and have important conversations. So an alumni of Science is a Drag, David Aceituno-Caicedo, is joining us for this conversation.
And we get to ask him different things like how the fight for the 2S LGBTQ+ community and the fight for climate solutions is similar, maybe a little different as well. And he also gets into the joy of drag and how it can empower us with knowledge on a subject that's pretty typically overwhelming, the climate emergency.
And since David is an environmental scientist, we did a really fun segment where we had people submit questions that they've always wanted to ask an environmental scientist to really celebrate the no silly questions atmosphere of Science is a Drag. So I'm really looking forward to his answers.
And I do want to add, David was dressed in full drag during our conversation, which just made it that much cooler.
Beautiful wig, leopard print shirt,
full beard, jewelry, all of it.
Makeup was fabulous.
Yeah, so just picture that while we're having this conversation.
David, can you just start us off by giving an intro into you and your science background?
So I am currently a PhD candidate in biogeochemistry at the University of Toronto, and biogeochemistry being the study of the movement of chemicals through the Earth system as facilitated by living organisms. So a very wide, broad field. Plenty of research to be done there. So anybody listening in, feel free to jump in and start doing your own. I'm a 6th-year PhD student, like I mentioned. I also have a professional master's in environmental science from the University of Toronto as well, where I studied contaminated site remediation. So I've really been in science for quite some time in my life.
Yeah, wow, very casual, just so chill.
Thank you.
You're sitting here looking absolutely fabulous, full drag for anyone listening. Can you tell us where the drag world comes in? What is Science is a Drag?
Science is a Drag is an award-winning, super fun and super creative show that merges both the worlds of science and drag in a way that's both educational and entertaining. So it is basically a drag queen performing a science lecture, but with glitter, glam, sass, just a lot of fun and just fabulousness. The show's aim is to make science much more approachable and fun and accessible by breaking down complex topics with humor and flair and reaching out to communities who traditionally might not have that big of a connection as traditional scientists would. And the performers are all part of science. So we all really are subject matter experts, as well as part of the 2S LGBTQ plus communities. So we use drags to make any topic from climate to astrophysics to biomedical research easy and fun to learn. And you can really find us on social media at Science is a Drag, or just in person at our flagship show in Toronto every June. And it sells out all the time. So make sure if you are planning on coming to get your tickets early. You know, you got to put in a little ad there, right?
Yeah, I love the plug. That's amazing. This is such an incredible idea. I had no idea that this even existed. And I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community and I love going to drag shows. So I love that these worlds have come together in that way, which is also what I wanted to ask, because talking about climate change, a lot of the times when we're having these conversations, it kind of does feel like a drag and it feels like it's not the most positive topic to talk about. So how do you manage to combine a topic like climate change and the planet into something that's so positive like drag that brings so much joy?
Yes, that's a really great question because traditionally these topics would not go together. It's like apple and oranges, but at the end of the day, they're both fruit, so we can still talk about them. So definitely there really is this delicate balance because climate change and the conversations around it can feel a little heavy and like you said, like a drag. And drag being on the flip side is really fun, vibrant, so full of energy and joy. But the key really is to channel that energy and creativity to spark these meaningful conversations while still keeping things lighthearted and accessible. So really, drag is all about transformation and creativity and performance. And those same qualities can be used to engage people in conversations about climate change. And you could do it in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming, because a lot of times we get that kind of climate doom sensation and that feeling. And so if you use humor and exaggerated performances and fashion to kind of highlight these environmental issues without kind of letting that sense of doom overwhelm us, it's a really good way for people to enjoy the topic and engage in these conversations without feeling kind of bogged down and not really wanting to talk about it because, you know, people don't necessarily want to engage in these really tough conversations pretty often.
Do you find that there's a lot of similarities kind of right now between the fight for the LGBTQ plus community and then the fight for climate activism?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure, because there's so many parallels in these conversations. For example, in terms of the LGBTQ plus community, we are fighting for rights and recognition and equality. And in a similar way, a lot of us are fighting for climate to be recognized, climate rights, for people to push forwards for these different venues to advance our different rights to access life in a great way in terms of our personal freedoms, but in a way where we actually have an environment and a world that we live in that is taken care of. So there's really great ways to kind of compare the two, especially in a sense where we have to really unite as a community and we have to have solidarity with each other to understand that if we want to create a better world in general, that means taking care of each other and taking care of the world.
In so much of my own personal journey of reading about climate activism, what can we do as individuals? One of the ongoing messages is the power of art and what the arts culture can do. So I'm just going to echo Shannon in saying just how incredible it is to learn that Science is a Drag exists. It's so empowering and so hopeful. What came first for you, the science or the drag?
Well, I would have to say the science by a long shot. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I was always the one who took all the science courses in high school. And then I did my undergrad in life sciences, so on and so forth. And then eventually I started watching RuPaul's Drag Race. I was introduced to that and I fell in love with it. And then when I started frequenting queer spaces and the Village in Toronto, I started kind of running into these really linchpin areas of the community where a lot of activism, a lot of voice, and a lot of visibility is put forth by drag queens. And eventually, this opportunity with Science is a Drag was brought up by the ideas behind it, the great minds, the mothers of the entire group and community. And so I signed up to be part of the group. You could say the second season of Science is a Drag. And from there, I joined, and I'm now one of the alumni who is a part of their community and who takes part in their the work that they do, these outreach programs. And so it's just been an absolute blessing for me to be able to kind of take these two aspects of my life and be able to merge them and really feel like a whole, complete person in such a unique way.
That is super unique. How would you describe science and how it actually influences the drag that you do?
For sure. And it's a really interesting question, again, because these are completely separate topics. But I suppose it's just the way we think. Science is a lot about trial and error. It's about experimentation, trying something new. And when you put yourself in drag, either for the first or second time, this is such a new, unique experience that you have to adapt to. Sometimes you're trying new makeup, new wigs, trying new things. You're trying, you might fail at times. I've got a few wigs downstairs that are just completely massacred. And it's not necessarily kind of the best thing for me to put on my head for a nice media interview, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm let down by that experience. It's something that I learn from. And these are skills that I've learned from that ability to try and make mistakes from science itself and experimentation.
In the spirit of Science is a Drag being a fun, safe space to learn and ask questions, we thought we could do a segment where there are no silly questions. So we had people, friends and coworkers submit their questions that they've always wanted to ask an environmental scientist. And we thought we could ask you those questions.
Bring them on. That's what I'm here for.
Okay, Shannon, you want to start it off?
Yes, this comes from a student from a 6th grade class who wants to know if there are any new species that are being discovered.
In such a big, wonderful world that we live in, there's so many places in the world that we actively haven't been. And there's all these little small creepy crawlies or these big huggable, lovable animals that we are consistently running into. So there are still a lot of species being discovered because species are evolving and adapting all the time. I taught a course on biogeography last term, not dressed like this, but could you imagine me standing in front of there, full drag? But one of the topics that we talked about was evolution and how it's a process that still goes on today because of the changing climate, because of species needing to adapt to new conditions. We are seeing kind of different, that slow emergence of evolution, but also in these little areas that we haven't explored in the world yet, different species just happening to be there and we just haven't encountered them yet.
I got to give that one an extra shout out because that actually comes from my sister Emma, Miss Christie, her grade 6-7 class. The students will be so happy that you answered that one. So thank you.
Of course. Shout out to your sister.
Okay, this one is about plastic straws. Were plastic straws ever the problem? Or are big companies just shifting the blame? Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so this is kind of a really contentious question at times because it is a question of responsibility and kind of at the end of the day, who is responsible for making these decisions? But there's another way to frame it, for example, in terms of civic responsibility, where we as consumers have a choice, or almost to say a vote on how we want things to be done. And we show that through the power of the dollar. And so in purchasing plastic straws, that's what we show that, it's something that we still approve, that we still maintain in the world. However, we are limited by the availability of different resources around us. So paper and plastic straws, if given the option, maybe some people will gravitate more towards plastic, maybe some people will gravitate more towards paper. At the end of the day, we need that choice, and that choice does come from companies. And so although we have the responsibility to show what we want, we need other companies and other organizations to give us those opportunities to vote with our dollar, to let them know, hey, we actually care about the planet. Let us make that choice for ourselves instead of just giving us one option that we unfortunately can't necessarily move away from. Because ultimately, choice is great. Some people do need plastic straws, for example, for disability use and so on and so forth. But other people just might use it out of convenience. And so it, again, comes down to what resources are provided to us, what options are provided to us. So although we do have that vote, it's ultimately the responsibility of companies to allow us to do that.
Amazing. Sarah, do you want to pick a question?
Okay, so this one is about what we keep hearing that I think could really send you into such a doom cycle of the 10 to 15 years before irreversible damage. But it feels like they're always saying 10 to 15 years. So when does the 10 years end? What does that actually mean? And, how many years do we actually have?
So it's a really interesting question to kind of have that the doomsday clock. It's really difficult at times to kind of predict the future using the information that we have at kind of in front of us. We do the best that we can with the capacity we have, and all of the time, our science and our technology is evolving and adapting to allow us to be able to make better and better predictions. But we are also at the same time developing technologies that are green, that are sustainable, that are allowing us to kind of move away from this bleak future. And so as much as there is that reality that there's a lot of issues going on in the world, kind of global warming, climate change, we also have to recognize that we as scientists and as people in general are doing our best, aside from kind of major oil companies, we are doing our best to create things and technologies to make sure that we can create a sustainable and green future. So that does kind of relate back to that previous question about being given the option of being able to choose sustainability over kind of fossil fuel use and such. But there is hope. And I will say that's the most important thing to have and to maintain. We can still have hope because technology these days is moving faster and faster to a better future. And it just needs to get to the point where we outpace these different sources of pollution and of kind of greenhouse gases and just the use of unrenewable resources. So there is some accuracy because of science being good and science being accurate, but it's always changing. Because just as much as things are moving towards a more negative and scary scale, we're working so hard as a group, as a species, as a community, as a global network to move us more towards a better future. So have hope and make sure to do your part too. Use your vote, use your dollar. It all comes down to all of us together as a collective. More so companies and such, they got to do better. But it really comes down to everyone doing their part to pressure those companies to do better as well.
Shannon, do you have one more that you want to choose from?
Another question that we had come in is, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of climate change, and how do we get people to buy in? Might be a big question.
So with climate change, great question. But when we talk about climate change, we have to also remember that people traditionally called it global warming because of that whole that cycle where we get more greenhouse gases and that increases the heat worldwide. So we get people to understand it from that warming and heating aspect, but it becomes so much more complicated when we realize that Earth's system weather is so much more than just warming. There's a lot of different storms, weather events to the north and south of the equator that are all impacted. They're all impacted by land masses, the formations of different mountains all across the world. So they understand it at the most simplest level, where greenhouse gases and us, polluting the environment is causing a problem. But getting people to kind of start branching out and understanding weather in a little bit more of a complicated way is kind of giving them the insight necessary for them to just kind of say, hey, it's still cold. Global warming is fake. Even though it might be a little cold still in some places, the weather's still changing and it's impacting a lot of people worldwide, not just where we are here. We have to be, again, a community, a global community, and understand that there are places around the world that are being impacted by these changes in ways that are much more significant than what we might be experiencing in a given moment. So instead of just having people see global warming and hear climate change and compare that just to warming and things getting hotter, having them understand that more extreme climatic and more extreme weather events are a big sign of change as well. So when we have these big storms or these big weather events, these floods going around the world, these big wildfires happening in the south, so on and so forth, it's a big sign that things are changing. And we have to recognize that that's all part of climate change. And it's not just global warming.
Here's one more question that I've always wanted to ask an environmental scientist.
Bring it on.
How are you? How are you? How's your mind? I've always wanted to ask an environmental scientist that because in my head, I just want to give you all a big hug because I can't imagine what it must be like to learn this, to process all of this, and watch the people in power ignore it.
That's a wonderful question. And thank you so much. I appreciate that question. Well, it is a lot of compartmentalization. It's kind of giving myself the time and the space to scream and be like, you know what? This isn't great. Could be better. Not the worst. But it's, we're struggling. But at the same time, I do kind of have to remind myself at times and friends of mine that, some of us in the science field, we are putting in the research to produce these technologies to better understand the world so that we can adapt even better. So although we have that knowledge and we kind of see people not necessarily being as active and as kind of knowledgeable as we would hope they would be, given all the information we put out there in the world. But we are still in our own ways working and contributing towards a more green future. So it's not like we're sitting down, twiddling our thumbs and saying, everything sucks. Oh no. We're doing that and still at the same time being like, everything sucks. Oh no. But at least I'm doing something about it. I'm doing my part, and I can be content and comfortable knowing that something's happening, some things are changing, and I'm doing my best to make the world a better place.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that work. We really appreciate that and chatting with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And it's really great to have this platform to really be able to bring this knowledge and information forward and just talk about science as a drag. You know, science is important. Being queer is important. Being science and queer is super cool. But being science. Thank you so much as well.
That might be one of the smartest people I've ever had a conversation with.
His enthusiasm was so contagious. That was such a fun conversation.
Yeah, I liked his honesty. He just feels so authentic, and I love everything he's doing in the science world and then also in the drag world. I think I'm still shocked that these two worlds can even come together in this way. I think this is just such a brilliant idea.
I think about how in elementary school we would learn through song and kind of games, and it reminds me of that, of just the art of play, right? And that's how our brains can kind of soak in important information. It's that, to me, kind of under that same umbrella of just creating a new, unique way to learn about important information.
Totally. I love going to drag shows, mainly just because they're very entertaining and you can have some drinks in the morning sometimes with some friends, which is fun. So I really think I'm going to now look for more drag shows that have like a learning aspect to them, whether it's science or anything else that's out there.
Well, if you are listening around the GTA, David did mention the flagship show that's in June for, of course, Pride Month. That would be really cool to check out. What were some of your big takeaways from that conversation, knowing how many different topics we covered?
You know what? I might sound silly, but you know what? There's no silly questions. I didn't even know that there's still more species that are not discovered. That is such a crazy thing. Yeah, I think just knowing that there are people out there who can master two incredible things, such as being a drag artist and then also being in school for science and doing all of those things. Yeah, just knowing that those things can go together is so cool. What about you?
That's like the highs and lows of
the world.
Right, because you see these, heartbreaking headlines about endangered species and species that we've lost, but then to hear that the world still grows, the world continues is really exciting and, hopeful to learn about. I think one of my big takeaways was when he answered, how is he doing? And he was talking about exactly that, like his highs and lows of also getting excited about all the green technology.
Yes.
To hear an environmental scientist get amped up and excited about something, I think it's hard. You'd be hard pressed to not soak that in.
Yeah, and he seemed really appreciative that you asked him that as well, which I really like. I also really liked his comparisons between the fight for LGBTQ plus rights and the fight for climate change, because you really need to have a strong head on your shoulders in order to fight for those things. So the fact that he's fighting for both, amazing.
Yeah, I talked to someone a few years ago. It was the executive director of the organization called the Water Watchers. So in Ontario, but they work with organizations, grassroots organizations across Canada. And she made this really powerful connection, basically saying whatever your fight is, maybe you're a huge advocate for women's rights, queer rights, find out how that's also connected to the climate crisis, because it is all interconnected. There isn't climate justice without social justice, without queer justice, without women's rights. So it's all intertwined. And for David to really drive that message home is just so powerful.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, especially if the planet is dying, you can't fight for the other things that you're fighting for, right?
Well, there's also that.
Thanks so much for listening. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Sarah, and thank you so much for coming out to the Earth Day party.
Earth Day Party podcast is in support of WWF Canada. Help protect wildlife and fight climate change during Earth Month with a gift to WWF Canada. You can give now at wwf.ca/earthmonth.